everyone who has joined us today. And I am going to begin by sharing my screen. So Malcolm, I'll need to go on to the screen sharing function. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be thinking about the process of gift giving in prehistoric Britain. Malcolm, I just need to be able to share my screen. So the period we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at the time in British history commonly referred to as prehistory. Now, in a very literal sense, history is any period of time where you have a written record. And you'll often hear historians talking about working in the archives because they are looking primarily at written records as their primary source of evidence to write a history about a particular period.
You'll be able to share your screen now.
On the other hand, they are looking at periods in history before there is a written record. So the work that archaeologists focus on is work where they're investigating objects which have been recovered from the environment. They may be buried. That's the way we usually think of archaeology, but they could also still be standing. Stonehenge is a fantastic example of an archaeological site that in no way could ever be said to have been lost. There is a bit of crossover. When we get to the second part of our talk and we start to look at Roman Britain, that's when we start to have written documents which allow us to add another source of information, written information, into our understanding of that part of British history. Now, prehistoric time periods are divided up into a number of, well, sometimes shorter, sometimes periods covering hundreds of thousands of years. This system was developed in the 1800s, and it's the one that you're going to hear me referring to today. Now, the first three periods, the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and the Neolithic, they are all what we would sometimes think of as the Stone Age. So if you hear people talking about the Stone Age, they're talking about the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and the Neolithic. Lithic, quite simply the Greek for stone, and then Paleo, Meso, and Neo, just old, middle, and new. So we're looking at a period in history where, from an archaeological point of view, the primary material used by humans for tools, for changing the world around them, are stones. We then move into the first use of metal by humans. So we have the Bronze Age, when bronze becomes the primary material used for tools and weapons, then leading on to the start of smelting of iron ore, what we call the Iron Age. And then finally, we're going to finish with Roman Britain, which is the period when the British Isles were subject to some extent, because not all areas of the British Isles were part of the Roman Empire, to the rule of the Roman Empire. The other thing we have to remember is that we're talking today specifically about British prehistory. This means that when we talk about a Bronze Age, we're talking about the British Bronze Age. And Bronze Age merely refers to the fact that this is when bronze starts to be used by humans in a particular area. So the Greek Bronze Age occurs 1,000 years before the British Bronze Age. So if someone's talking about the Greek Bronze Age, they'd be talking about 3200 BC. The Bronze Age on the Indian subcontinent is 3300 BC. So it's always very useful when you hear people talking about these periods to actually define which geographical area they're talking about. So today, everything refers to the British Isles. Now, in terms of London, London really began as a settlement in Roman times. Archaeologists have never found any substantial signs of settlement that predate Roman Britain. They have found evidence of human activity in the London area, and certainly in the Bronze Age, there appears to have been activity near the River Thames, and archaeologists have found remains of a wooden bridge near Vauxhall Bridge. They've also found remains of a Mesolithic timber structure, again near Vauxhall Bridge. The function of these structures is not known. They may have been bridges across what was a natural crossing point where the River Effa joins the River Thames. It may have been that they were like quays or platforms that took people from land out into the water. We're not sure. But what we do know is that when we're talking about London as a settlement, we don't talk about activity in London as a domestic settlement place with sustained occupation until the time of Roman Britain. We're also thinking today about the idea of a gift. Now, a gift is a thing given willingly without payment. Now, that doesn't mean that there might not be some sort of expectation of something in return. And we'll think about that a bit more in a moment. Word itself, gift, comes from the Old Norse verb to give. And the Old English use of the word originally started in connection with marriage dowries, so the exchange of objects at a point of marriage between peoples in two different families. Nowadays, we use it much more broadly, and at this time of year, the word gift surrounds us because this is the time when the shops are encouraging us to buy gifts for the Christmas period. Not that will be happening too much this year under Tier 4, of course. So it's the thought that counts is another thing you often hear when people are talking about gifts. But going back to what we said previously about a gift is meant to be something given without payment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there is not something expected in return. What that means is that you can add value to a gift beyond its pure monetary value by imbuing it with emotional value, sentimental value, we might call that. You then have the economic value of the gift, the material it is made from, the labour that went into actually making it. And nowadays, that is translated in our world into a price, the price you pay for the object which you then give to someone else. You then can have social gifting, where a gift might be operating not in terms of reciprocation or gift giving between two people, but within a larger community, a gift from one person to a group of people, and it has social value. And then the final one, the reciprocal value. What are you implicitly expecting in return for this gift? And we're going to explore all four meanings of gift giving during our time together today. And we're going to start right back in the Paleolithic period. And we're looking here at a collection of objects from the British Museum. You'll see to the left that we have 5 hand axes. The one on the far left, you can see along the edge where the flint has been knapped to make the cutting edge. Flint is extremely sharp when it is knapped, when you strike one flint against another, to flake off, to break off part of the flint and expose a thin edge. So these hand axes, which really lead us to what we know is the Stone Age, were the primary hand tool during the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and on into the Neolithic period. And hand axes were used for cutting materials such as meat and wood. So they enabled people to start manipulating the environment around them. Now, the British Museum's oldest hand axe is the Olduvai hand axe, which is about 1.4 million years old. Was found in the Olduvai Gorge in East Africa. The makers of this axe were the first humans who then spread out across Africa into Central Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and got into Asia. The oldest axe we have from Britain is the Hazebra Axe, which lives up in Norwich Castle. It's part of their collection. And that dates from 850,000 years ago. So a point when we know archaeologically that the first humans were starting to live, if not on a permanent basis, on a nomadic or a seasonal basis in the area of land that we now know as the British Isles. Hand axes could also be tied onto a handle. These don't often survive because they would have been made from wood, which would have rotted away. The twine that was used to bind them, again, an organic material that rots away in the cold, wet British soil. We are not the best geology for the preservation of organic materials. But what we do have surviving are the stones themselves. And on the far right, we'll see the stone that is going to start our discussion of gift giving. Now, this stone actually was still in use in Scotland as late as 1800. And in 1800, this stone was being used as a lucky charm. You'll see that it's got two holes in it, which were drilled later. And it's also got a silver binding around the edge. And this stone would have been worn, probably attached to a belt, as protection against kidney disease. In the 1800s, arrowheads and axes that were found were thought of as thunderbolts that had fallen from the sky, and that they were a charm against lightning. And because of their shape, because they are kidney-like in shape, they were given a correlating medical virtue, a charm against kidney disease. In fact, the original material comes not from Britain, but from the Italian Alps. So if we go back to the Neolithic, we are looking at a Jadeite hand axe. So we fill in the holes, we take off the silver binding, and we are looking at an object which value comes from the fact that it's not sourced in British geology, but is collected in the Italian Alps and is then transported, is traded or passed through many hands. And on that journey, it would have been reshaped and also polished until it arrived with its final owner here in Britain. So the value to the person owning this hand axe is that it's highly polished. So there's a lot of hours that have gone in to shaping and finishing the surface of the tool. And there is also value because it's an exotic import. It is not local in nature. It comes from a bed of rock which does not exist in the British Isles. So what we're doing here is we're seeing something which may have been a gift, which may have been viewed as a gift as it was exchanged between the final two people, in terms of the material it is made from and the amount of work that has gone into shaping and polishing it. If we go on to our next slide, we'll see another three little objects, again from Neolithic Scotland, and these are on display at the British Museum on the upper floors. They are carved stone balls. They're actually about the size, they're slightly bigger than a golf ball, between a golf ball and a tennis ball in size. And currently they are of unknown function. They could be ritual, they could be ceremonial, they may have been gifts. What we do know is that they are unlikely to have been merely everyday functional objects, not only because of the amount of labour that has gone into shaping this hard local stone, but also the fact that each of the designs is different. Many of these types of balls were found in the Orkneys, also in other areas of Scotland, particularly in Aberdeenshire. And they're best understood as precious belongings, possibly of a community leader during the Neolithic periods. Archaeologists think that they are symbols of social power, prestige, and authority. So as they pass into the ownership of a community leader, the fact that they are imbued with all the labour that was needed to shape them, the fact that they are non-standard, each of them is different, means that they then become objects of social power. And they could, in that sense, then be gifted from one community leader to another. This is the other thing that's often very difficult to tell about objects, is how long they stayed in active circulation. Did these belong to just one person, or were they then gifted on to the next community leader as a way of passing power on? A lot of unknowns in the prehistoric period. Attempts by archaeologists to understand the cognitive processes, how people were thinking, but very often these had to be interpretations based on the object before us. So their colour, their texture, the natural patterning and the human patterning all seem to be pointing to high status objects. What's also interesting about them is that they seem to imply that there is a link between the people in Neolithic Scotland and Neolithic Ireland, because the patterns on some of the balls are similar to the patterns found carved into the huge passage tomb at Knowth in the Boyne Valley. And some of the Scottish balls decorated with these patterns. So it tells us that some Neolithic people have travelled far and wide. Now, what's also interesting at this point is that the other explanation is that it is the idea that has travelled far and wide, and that that pattern has perhaps been passed from person to person, either through a worked object such as these carved balls, or perhaps that pattern has passed inscribed onto a pot and then been copied in Scotland onto the stone object. But whichever one it is, we know that there's an exchange of ideas, an exchange of understanding between Neolithic Scotland and Neolithic Ireland. Now, we've said that the British climate and the British soil is not very conducive to the survival of organic materials. And this is probably one of the softer materials that survives from the Neolithic period. These are amber beads. They are all from a single large necklace. You can see the strings of individual beads that would have formed part of the necklace. You can then also see what we call plate beads, which sometimes act as spacers between shorter runs of beads. And you can also see cylinder beads. Each of these beads and each of these plates is worked from amber, a fossilized tree resin. Now, amber has a density less than salt water. So if it's exposed in underwater rock beds, it floats. And one of the simplest ways that amber moved around in Neolithic times was simply by floating across the North Sea. So a lot of amber, which probably originated in underwater beds in the Baltic area, was deposited on the Danish coastline. But amber also floated across to the Scottish coastline and the east coast of Scotland. So we can't be too sure, unless we scientifically analyse the amber itself, where the amber originated. Now, a moderate level of skill is needed to work amber, because it's quite a soft material and you can work it with flint tools. What our value is added to the amber, therefore, is the fact that this is worked to a very small size, so there's a lot of labour involved. You also have holes drilled through each of the beads to enable them to be threaded, and you have a variety of shapes being produced. And amber necklaces are an interesting example of where what has not survived actually infers a sort of negative value on what remains, because these are the beads that survive that were broken, that didn't go wrong. that didn't split halfway through being drilled, that weren't shaped, and it was then exposed as a weak piece of amber that was flawed. So the beads that survive, the beads that become part of the necklace, have an added value in terms of the amount of beads that were wasted. So the surviving beads are then strung into a necklace where low value of an individual bead is then negated by having nearly 100 beads placed into one necklace. So you've got accumulation of value. Amber is better preserved in water than soil, and these beads were actually found in a lake, a wet environment in Wiltshire. And it's wondered whether they started as prized personal possessions, which later became a votive offering. And we'll come back to that term, votive offering, later in our talk. Now move on to the Bronze Age, and we move on to a beautiful bronze cauldron. And this cauldron was actually found in the River Thames at Battersea. And the size of the cauldron would have provided food for a large group of people. And the types of foods that we know are being consumed and produced in Bronze Age Britain are things such as pork, beef, oats and wheat, beans, leafy greens, apples, berries, honey, mustard, mushrooms, and cheese. Now, what we think is happening where you have large cauldrons of this size is that one explanation is that the cauldron could be used to produce food for a family group or a household group. So you have a type of cooking which nowadays we would call one pot cooking, and you produce a large stew which is then divided out, served out to a number of people. This cauldron, however, is highly decorated. You can see where the different plates, bronze plates, have been joined together, and the rivets appear as a pattern of decorative studs. There's also been time taken into shaping the rim and the handles themselves. And the supports which attach the rim to the body of the cauldron again show a high level of decoration. So we think that this is quite a high status piece of dining ware, not an everyday cauldron. And we think that possibly it was used by the elite in Bronze Age
Hello, Catherine. Are you still there?
It might also be accompanied by travel over a long distance and ceremony. So there's added value to the occasion in terms of how far people have come to consume the food, and ceremony, music, movement that occurs as part of the feasting. And archaeologists have found evidence of social feasting at Stonehenge dating back to the Neolithic period. And certainly as we then move forward into the Bronze Age period, we know that social feasting remains an important social mechanism, a way of gifting to your community. Now, our next little object, again, is from the Bronze Age, and it's an awful lot smaller. It's about the size of a small pot of hummus that you might buy in the supermarket nowadays. It's a pottery cup and lid, and it was found in Wiltshire. It dates to the Bronze Age, and right at the very top, there is a little knob area which has an incised, broken hole running through it, which probably originally contained an organic thread, so something for lifting the lid off. We don't know what was inside the pot, what it contained, but let's have a little look at the inside of the pot as we see it today. And you'll notice that this elaborate decoration on the outside of the pot continues on the inside of the pot. It's then replicated around the lid. So we come back to that thought we had at the beginning about how you can add value to an object just by the labour, the care that goes in to working the pot before it is fired, to decorating it. Also, the fact that it is decorated inside, that decoration is meant to be seen. What was in the pot might also have been part of the gift. We know nowadays that there's a tradition that you're never supposed to give someone a purse unless it's got a coin in it. So was there something originally in this pot when it was gifted? We can also think about the fact that producing this pot at the end point would have needed fuel to fire the bonfire in which the pot was eventually created and hardened. So you may have a low value material, local clay dug from the ground. You've then got the handiwork. All pots at this point were made by hand, no wheel thrown pots until the Roman times. And then after you've had the time shaping and decorating, you have the time and the fuel needed to create your final piece. And again, pottery is another lovely example of where we don't know how many pieces didn't survive the firing. If there was any air left in the clay or the bonfire burnt unevenly, then pieces might be damaged or destroyed during firing. So this survivor has added value by the fact that it has survived the whole of the manufacturing process. In the Iron Age, this idea of social feasting, of people gathering to consume food, continues. And this is an Iron Age flagon. They're a pair of flagons. They're actually from mainland Europe. We haven't got any surviving examples from the British Isles, but they are representative of the type of objects that would have been used across Iron Age Britain and Europe. They are bronze. The main body of the flagon is shaped from a single piece of bronze, and they are decorated with red enamel and coral. So we've got bronze, which was quite an easily worked material, which had been in circulation since the Bronze Age, but we've got added value in terms of the material used by the enamelling and also the inset coral, which would have been an imported exotic material, transported and traded across the Mediterranean. Now, what I like to think about this object is that regardless of how beautiful it is and the amount of time that has been taken to create it, once you actually have this object in use, some other types of gifting come into play. So first of all, we've got what is in the flagon. And we're assuming that it was used for sharing alcoholic drink, perhaps beer, perhaps imported wine. And as that wine was poured, the lid comes into play. Because you'll see that on the lid, the spout finishes with a little duck. The handle itself is a hollow cast wolf or dog, and there's another small wolf or dog sitting on the top. So if you imagine that the flask is tilted to enable the liquid to flow out of the spout, you have a gift of humour, of laughter, because as the liquid comes out of the spout, so the little duck appears to be swimming on a river of wine or beer. You also have the humour that as you tilt it, even though the dog appears to get closer to the duck moves away and the dog never manages to catch the duck. It's like that old cartoon trope of the mouse running and the cat never catching it. So you've got a gift not only in terms of the beauty of the object you are using to serve something to someone, the very finest tableware. You then have the container of the flagon, and you have the humour that occurs when that flagon is being used. Our next object is a green glass bowl. Now, this was discovered in Hertfordshire, and it is an imported glass bowl, probably imported from Syria. It's only 13 inches across, so you could quite easily hold it in two cupped hands, and you'll notice that it's got little flanges around the edge, and these were probably there to help you hold the bowl because those would nestle between your fingers as you held them, so they act almost as mini handles. Now, this is glass making which has added value because it is a technology which comes from outside the British Isles at this point. Glass making itself dates back to at least 4000 BC, long before humans had discovered how to smelt iron. But the archaeological evidence for that early glass making comes from the Lebanon, Syria, and possibly ancient Egypt. What happens in Britain when we get to prehistoric Britain and to the Iron Age is that glass coming in is all imported. It is not until we get to Roman times that we have evidence of glass actually being made in Britain. And even at that point, what we have is an evidence of glass working. So the Romans are importing raw glass materials or using local waste glass, and I suppose we'd refer to it as a form of recycling. And there's evidence of glass works where scrap glass would have been melted and reshaped in London, near Holborn, on what would have then been the River Fleet running across the surface of London to the west of Roman London. So glass, gift-wise, it is an exotic import. It is a technology which is not found locally. So all of those, together with the fact that it is very fragile, you would not use this every day. By its very nature, it has to be used carefully in a very controlled environment or it will break. All adds to its value as a gift. Our next object again is Iron Age. This was found in Devon. It is a bronze mirror. The surface, the other side of the mirror, would have been polished to give it a reflective surface. There are no glass mirrors at this point. They are all metal mirrors. And I think that this is an interesting object because we can immediately start to think about the level of decoration, the amount of time it would have taken to actually create this, and that all adds to its value. I think it also goes back to what we were looking at with the flagon, the humour, because if you look at the handle and the mount that joins the handle to the bronze mirror plate, when you turn it round, you can see it's actually a little cat. And it had probably two little enamel beads for the eyes, and then the body and the tail of the cat with its little back feet are the handle. So you have a gift again of humour, of whimsy. The other thing that you would have had is that when you were using the mirror, it would have gifted you an opportunity to actually see yourself. So you would have been able to develop a sense of personal identity, to start to curate your own appearance. We know that at the same period in Britain, examples of objects such as tweezers and nail cleaners have been found. And a double-sized razor and pair of tweezers was found in London dating back to 900 BC. So we know that at this point, people are starting to use the reflective surface of this mirror in order to create an individual personal look. And we'll come back to this idea of personal appearance shortly. Before then, let's have a quick look at another object, which again comes from the River Thames. It's called the Battersea Shield because it was found in the stretch of River Thames that runs through modern Battersea. But what's interesting about this is that although it is large, it's over 1 metre tall, although it is made from metal, which we tend to think of as a very strong material, it's actually not a complete shield and certainly not a functional shield. Originally, The main part of a shield in prehistoric Britain would have been made from wood. And this would have been the metal plate attached to the front of that wood. The wood acted as the shock absorber. So as the sword came towards you and landed on your shield, it would have cut straight through thin metal, but it was snagged on the wood behind. So actually, this metal facing shield plate would never have been used in real life. But the level of decoration seems to imply that with its wooden backing, it would have been a very high status ceremonial type of shield, perhaps belonging to the elite within a society or a community. The other interesting thing is that it was found in a river context. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, the idea of votive offerings. Now, a votive offering is a gift to the gods. So whenever you hear an archaeologist say votive offering, they mean a gift given by people to the gods that they believe in return for a favour which you are asking, or as a thank you for something that's already happened. And in Iron Age Britain, the sacred landscape was associated with wet areas, so rivers and ponds and lakes and marshes. And we think that this may have been thrown into the River Thames as a votive offering, which was seen to go from the human world into the spirit world. Another example of this is the Hoxhan Horde. Found in modern Suffolk, the largest item is the Hoxhan Great Torque, made from a gold alloy, gold mixed with silver. It weighs just over 1 kilogram in total, and it's made from 64 individual gold threads, which are twisted together to make 8 larger ropes, which are then themselves twisted. Gold is a very soft metal. It's very easy to work cold by hand, but would still need a huge amount of skill and time to create something to this level. The terminals are cast, they're actually hollow, and it would have been worn in a human community. There is evidence on a lot of these objects of wear, of them having been worn around the neck. But the Hoxhan Torque was found with a group of other gold objects in a hole in the ground. And we think that these objects, most of which were already in circulation in a human community, were gathered together and buried as a votive offering to the gods and goddesses. They're a high value material, so they are something that the humans expect their gods and goddesses to value. They're prized possessions, so you're giving up something that means a lot to you. So you're gifting the gods the sentimental value. They may have been items that had belonged to your parents, your grandparents. So you are also offering the gods time, an heirloom that has age, that you are prepared to give to them. So a high value votive offering, this time not found in a water context, but possibly relating to the idea that the realm of the gods is outside the realm of the humans, the natural world, and that digging into the ground, depositing in water is a bit like putting something into a portal that travels from this world to the next. And this idea of votive gifting is something that we're going to continue to explore as we go into Roman Britain. We're also going to continue to explore value that comes through materials, the amount of time taken to make something, the value, the sentimental value that is then added to an object. And we're going to look at a few examples from the Roman Britain gallery as we continue to explore the idea of gift giving. We're now going to have a 10-minute break. And at the end of the 10-minute break, Malcolm will welcome you back and we will engage in the second part of today's talk. See you in 10 minutes.
Thank you, Catherine. That was brilliant. As Catherine said, we've got a 10-minute break to go and make a cup of coffee or whatever you need to do. So it's now 11:44, so we'll be back at 11:54. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. I'm now going to hand over to Catherine, who is going to conclude her talk, at the end of which I'll put all the questions you've been asking throughout the workshop to her at the end. Thank you very much. So with no further ado, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Welcome back to the second part. We're now going to conclude the second part with a set of objects from Roman Britain. And then, as Malcolm says, we'll have time for question and answer at the end. So the first object we're going to look at, do please excuse me for a moment. Sometimes when my slideshow has been on rest for a little while, it decides that it's not very happy and it's not going to move on. So let me just get it all started in. There we are. Wonderful. It's woken up. It was having a little snooze during that 10 minutes, but it's back with us. So our first object that we're going to look at is an object known as the Welwyn Garden City Burial. It is a grave pit which dates from the late Iron Age and was discovered when a housing estate, the Panshanger housing estate, was being built in Welwyn Garden City. They were digging a trench for a gas main. This cut across part of the grave. The archaeologists then moved in and excavated the whole area, and this is what they found. It's a grave which dates from the late 1st century BC, and it dates from between two key Roman events in relation to the British Isles. In 55 and then 54 BC, Julius Caesar brought military expeditions from Gaul, modern-day France, across to the British Isles. And then 100 years later, in AD 43, under the Emperor Claudius, the British Isles were actually invaded, occupied by the Roman army, and the province of Britannia became the newest province in the Roman Empire. Now, what might have been happening during this 100 years, what we call the late Iron Age in British prehistory, was that the Romans were starting to cultivate relationships, particularly in southern England, with local tribal kings and queens. At this point, the British society was divided into small local kingdoms ruled by a king or a queen. And the Romans started to build up diplomatic relationships with these leaders as a way of ensuring peace on the edge of their empire, which at that point stretched to the modern coast of France, to areas such as Calais, and also meant that if they then decided in the future to make Britain part of that empire, they already had some friends in the area. And this burial seems to reflect this growing diplomatic relationship. A lot of the objects are what we could call native objects, so they were made in Iron Age Britain, but they also include imported objects. We have wheel-thrown Roman pottery, which would have been imported from Roman Gaul. We also have amphora, which would have been imported containing Roman wine. And right in the center of the burial group, we have a little Roman silver two-handled cup. And it's even been suggested that this cup might have been a diplomatic gift that was exchanged when a leader from Britain actually traveled across into the Roman Empire, perhaps as far as Rome. So what we have evidence of here is interaction between prehistoric Britain and the Roman Empire. If we then look at a set of objects known as the Winchester Horde, you'll first of all be reminded of the objects we saw in the Snettisham Horde. So we have some gold torques, and torques were worn around the neck. Gold is a very soft material. People often say to me, well, how could you have got that round your neck? Because it is very soft, you can ease it open, put it around the neck and then close it. So we have torques, we have gold bracelets, we have the Iron Age equivalent of a zip or buttons, a way to fasten your cloak with brooches and a chain. And this hoard of objects was found in a field near Winchester, hence its name, the Winchester Horde. And it's made from gold of very high purity. It's got a purity of between 91 to 99% pure gold. So there's a lot of value in the material. There's also value in the manufacture, the craft work that has gone into shaping and creating these pieces. But what's most interesting about these objects is, although they look to our eye like Iron Age objects like the Snettisham-Tork, the technology used to make them and the way in which they are manufactured is Roman. We have in effect a torque made from a Roman gold chain plaiting technology. And we think that these were possibly expensive diplomatic gifts used by the Romans to win friends and influence people in southern England. So they were ingratiating themselves to create a network of pro-Roman elite who they could then use as client kings, who would maintain good relations with the Roman Empire, and would then be a base on which they could garner local support for the invasion which occurred in AD 43. Now, another example of a horde which we have dates solidly from the Roman period. This is the Hoxhan Horde. It's the largest hoard of late Roman silver and gold ever discovered in Britain, and it was found in Hoxhan in Suffolk. Now, what's interesting for us in our pursuit of gift giving is that the hoard, when it was recovered, archaeologists, as they excavated, were able to work out from the different layers on which the objects sat in the soil that originally the objects had been packed, some of them in small cloth bags, into a wooden box, which was then buried. Now, the reason for the burial is unknown. It seems to be the collection of a single wealthy family. It's possibly only part of their possessions because there are no large silver serving vessels. It seems to be mostly small portable items such as spoons and personal jewellery. And what's interesting about one of the bracelets is that I think this gives us good evidence of gifting within a Roman household. Because not only is the object of gold, not only is the object intricate because it is pierced work, but the object actually contains a name. And if you look at where the object has been digitally unrolled at the bottom, you'll see that it is inscribed in Latin with the words, "Use this happily, Lady Juliana." So we have the name of an individual person living in late Roman Britain. And I think that wording heavily implies that this was a personal gift, probably between two family members, which, as you can see from the slightly battered nature of the bracelet, probably was a well-worn and well-loved personal possession. We also see examples of Roman jewellery in other hoards. This hoard dates from an unknown period. It's probably late Roman. It was found in 1811, but had no context, so we don't know exactly where it was originally found. And a lot of the objects from the hoard were lost before it arrived at the British Museum in 1850. But what's interesting is that the hoard, again, seems to include a collection of objects which you would expect are of a number to belong to a household, or perhaps even an individual. So we have necklaces, we have bracelets, and we have rings. And these rings are beautiful. They include gold rings with semi-precious stones set in them, and they include snake rings. Snakes were considered at this period as a symbol of good luck. So a piece of silver or gold would be stamped with a snake's head and a snake's tail, and that would be quite simply coiled or wrapped to make a ring. Now we know that these rings, which when they appear in a hoard, look as if they may be very high value, may be gifts that involved the exchange or the trading of a lot of commodities or the payment of a large amount of money to obtain them in the first place, were not always necessarily so. Let me share with you another hoard from Snettisham. This is known as the Jewellers Horde, and it was found while a house was being built in the village of Snettisham in 1985. And what's interesting about this hoard is it appears to be the working stock of a Roman jeweller. It was found in a single pot, and some of the objects were actually bent. Some of the silver bracelets were bent to enable them to pass through into the body of the pot. Some of the silver, coins, and the little ingots and the scrap silver are probably the raw material that the jeweller used to create the silver pieces such as the necklaces, the bracelets, and the rings. And what's also interesting is that alongside silver pieces, we also have a large number of carved gemstones. They're Carnelian, which is a semi-precious stone, and would probably have been imported, traded from Roman Egypt, where it is a common stone mined from the desert. And these stones have been engraved with symbols of good luck, including deities such as the goddess Fortuna, the goddess of good luck. So what we appear to have here is a number of imported jewels. These gemstones are pre-carved when they arrive as part of the jeweller's stock in trade. And the jeweller would then have fitted those into the rings. And we can see here some rings with empty bezels, some where the jewel has already been fitted. And this is exactly the sort of item which would have been likely to be gifted as a lower value gift in Roman Britain. The fact that all the objects are silver suggests that with the absence of gold, that we are looking at jewellery that was meant for high status customers, but not the very highest level. So the silver is the dominant material being used to produce these gifts. Now, when we talk about gifts, we had a little chat earlier when we were talking about Bronze Age Britain about the situation in which these gifts might be exchanged. We were looking at the social feasting, a time when people might have come together, when there would have been ceremony, when there would have been music, when there would have been movement, when there would have been travel from wide distances as people met up and the food was shared. And what we have here is a little note from Roman Britain. It's a very thin piece of wood. It's about the size of a modern postcard. It would have been written on and then folded in half, and you can see where it's cracked over time and that fold has split. And this is one of the Vindalanda Tablets. They're a set of documents recovered from a Roman fort just south of Hadrian's Wall. It probably dates to about AD 90. And what it is a letter sent by the wife of the fort commander to one of her friends, the wife of another fort commander in northern England. And the wife has invited her friend to join her for her birthday. She has written, "I expect you, sister. Farewell, sister, my dearest soul. I hope you will prosper and hail." And she has asked her to join her on the occasion of her birthday, which it says is the 11th of September. And she has invited her over for a small birthday party. So here we have an example of when individual personal lower value gifts might have been exchanged between people in Roman Britain, just as today the birthday was a point for gift giving. Also in Roman Britain, you could have larger scale points of ceremonial gift giving. This is a Roman cavalry helmet. It's what we call a display helmet. It would not have been worn in actual combat. It's made from bronze. It may well originally have been gilded, as we see on the reconstruction. It's from the Winchester Horde, and it would have belonged to a cavalryman stationed in Roman Britain. And the clue that this object was probably used as part of ceremonial situations was that if you look carefully, you can see it's got some little hooks, some little rings set onto different parts of the helmet. And we think that these would originally have been threaded on special occasions with ribbons or perhaps feathers, so that it would have been plumed. And as the cavalryman moved, so there would have been movement of the ribbons and the feathers. And we think that this sort of helmet was worn during colourful events which reenacted mock battles, similar, I suppose, to what nowadays we would understand as the Edinburgh tattoo. So they were a combination of training sessions, where the cavalrymen got to practice manoeuvres, where the horses were exercised and trained in particular movements and in particular environments. But also they would have been an occasion to entertain the troops. And we think that they were often held on special occasions such as the emperor's birthday. So even in Roman Britain, far away from the heartlands of the Roman Empire in Rome, the emperor's birthday would have been a day when there would have been celebrations on behalf of the emperor, and that these celebrations, these maneuvers, the skill involved in putting on these mock battles would be a way of honouring the emperor and also gifting the military skill to his service and the defence of the empire. We now move back to another example of a much more personal gift-giving situation in Roman Britain. This casket actually comes from Rome. We haven't got an example that has yet been discovered from Roman Britain, but it is an example of something that would have happened throughout the 400 years of Roman Britain, and that is the ceremony of marriage. Because we think that this casket, silver with gold gilding, was a wedding gift. On the top, it has a portrait, and we believe this is the bride and groom, and it is also inscribed with their two names, Secundus and Projector, and it also then follows on with the inscription, Living Christ. So we think this may be an example of early Roman Christian wear, gift giving as part of a Christian marriage ceremony between Projector and her soon-to-be husband, Secundus. And this custom of giving gifts as part of the marriage ceremony is something that we know continued over in Roman religion from the pagan period into the early Christian ceremonies, and continues up to the present day, because we know that the point of marriage, the point of union between two people, is something that nowadays is supported with the ceremony, with words, with your best frock, and also with gift giving. Also in Roman Britain, we've got an example of a lower value gift giving, possibly more everyday type of gift giving. And it could also be a gift that you give to yourself, because what we have here is an example of a souvenir. It's a glass vessel. It was found in Colchester, and it dates to the 1st century AD, so just before 100 AD. And it is a souvenir made for an arena or a circus where gladiatorial or horse racing, chariot racing events have taken place. So what we have on the glass beaker is a souvenir which shows you where you've been. You have been to the arena, you have seen chariot racing, and each of these chariots pulled by 4 horses. And we can see from the diagram below that there were 4 teams taking part in this chariot race. And then the inscription across the top tells us who was actually running that day and who won. Now, the glass was made by blowing the warm glass into a mould. Now, this method of manufacture requires careful preparation of the mould itself, but the actual practice of blowing and finishing the vessels is much quicker than freehand blowing. So it's a form of early mass production, which means that the moulds could be customized at quite short notice with a particular inscription referring to the runners and who won on any one particular day. So these chariot races, which may have occurred on an annual, a biannual, a monthly occasion, could each be accompanied by a souvenir, which you brought for yourself or you brought for someone else. The next set of objects we're going to look at is a set of temple objects, and these are interesting because they call back to 2 different types of gift giving that we've been talking about. Not only have we got examples of jewellery, which may in their first life have been gifts given between 2 individuals in Rome and Britain, but we also have a collection of objects which were gathered together and buried in the ground as a votive offering. We know this because the objects included are statues of Roman goddesses. This was a British goddess known as the goddess Senu, based on the Roman goddess Minerva. They were sort of twinned up with each other. And we also have what are known as votive plaques, very thin pieces of gold and silver, which are embossed with a picture of the goddess, and which, if you look carefully at the bottom, have a little tab on them, which means we think they were probably set into a wooden frame inside the goddess's shrine. The shrine room would have been dark, and any light in that room, any candles, any lamps would have made these gold and silver plaques glisten and reflect light. So what you've got is a combination of gifting the goddess a precious material. You've got the combination of gifting that goddess light, that the light that is reflected within her shrine, that lights up her presence. But you also have examples of where you might actually gift something that's not, dare we say, mass manufactured, that you bought when you arrived at the shrine, but you've also got examples of someone gifting something very personal. Perhaps they had something very specific they were requesting of the goddess and thought that such a request needed a more valuable gift than something you brought at the shrine shop and gifted to the goddess. This is another example of a votive offering, and this is a bronze plaque found in Colchester, and this time the offering is not really in the form of the object itself. We have a plate of bronze, and again with the tabs, this may have been fixed into some sort of wooden frame, but here we have a more individual gifting to the god, because this is dedicated by an individual. He says in his dedication that he has given this gift with his own personal wealth. He has also gifted it to the emperor. So he is gifting it to the state of Rome. Another interesting thing about this particular gift is that we have within it not only the gift giver's name, l'osso verde, but he also specifically mentions that he is very proud of his Caledonian father. So he's of Scottish heritage. So someone now living in the Roman province of England. Scotland was never officially part of the Roman Empire. The Romans at one point occupied lowland Scotland up to the Antinian Wall, but never occupied the whole of Scotland. So we have someone of Scottish heritage now living in England who is gifting to the emperor a plate of value with a written inscription, which really speaks, I think, to his hope, his request that the emperor will ensure a stable empire for this individual to live in. We have here two more votive plaques, but what's interesting about these plaques is that they are both Christian in nature. So they're similar to the pagan plaques that we saw earlier for the goddess Suna, but this time they are inscribed with a Christian set of initials, the Chi Rho, which looks to us like a P and an X, and those are the first two letters in the Greek alphabet of the name Christ, Chi and a Rho. So whenever you see those two, you are looking at an object which had a Christian owner, an early follower of the Christian faith in Britain, and also inscribed with the Christian symbol Alpha to Omega, again from the Greek alphabet, the first letter and the last letter, taken from the book of Revelations and the Old Testament, meaning God is there at the beginning and God is there at the end. And what I particularly like about these two is that if you look at the gold version, you'll see that the omega is upside down. It looks like a M instead of a W. So it's possible, or I would say probable, that this votive plaque was not actually made by a Christian, hence they did not see that they'd put part of the symbol upside down, but was made for a Christian to buy and dedicate as a votive offering to the Christian God in Roman Britain. So thinking about gift giving in Roman Britain then led me to think about gift giving nowadays. And of course, we are in a key period of winter gift giving across many world faiths. This is a Christmas card from the British Museum collections for dates from 1937. And it is the prototype print for what was then going to be a mass-produced Christmas card. And it shows the key example of Christian gift giving, the three kings gifting to the baby Jesus. If we then look at later Christian examples, I found a couple of nice examples in our collections from the Victorian times. Here's a Victorian Christmas card, dates from the 1870s, and it wishes the person who receives the card a good Christmas, a good New Year, and also good luck. And look who else gets a shout out. Fortuna, the Roman goddess of good luck. So the idea of gifting someone good luck by petitioning or calling on the goddess Fortuna reflected on a Christian Christmas card from the 1870s. Next to it, we have a small gold brooch on the back of which was a small compartment in which you could put a keepsake. And on the front of it, we have the Christmas robin. And we also have the holly and the ivy. And again, we have a link back here to Roman times. The Romans had a midwinter festival called Saturnalia, which they held in honor of the god Saturn. And it was a midwinter festival when there would be the consumption of food, the drinking of wine, the gathering of people, and the decoration of the home with evergreen, such as the holly and the ivy, a tradition which has continued into the present day. And the robin, which in Iron Age times was seen as the key bird of summer. Now, that might surprise you. Why would you have a robin on a winter object? But it's because in Iron Age times, the robin was supposed to take command on the day of the winter solstice, because that was the day on which the daylight started to extend, leading you to summer. So you had started what I suppose you could call robin time. So the robin, Celtic traditions talking about the appearance of the robin in winter, then continuing on into the present day. So we have now arrived at the end of our talk, and we have some time left before the end to have a look at some questions and answers. So Malcolm, what questions and answers would people like to discuss for the last part of our session together?
Thank you, Catherine. Just before I ask the questions, I've just got a quick poll I would like people to do, just to see how today's talk went. So I've just launched the poll there. If you could, launching poll, yeah, it should be just launching any minute now. Yeah, the poll's launched. If you could just answer that poll for me, I'd be very grateful to see how, just some feedback on today's talk. And then I've got 3 very nice questions for you, Catherine, coming up.
Excellent. I love a nice question.
Very good. I'm just going to give it 20 more seconds, and then we'll questions. Cool. All right, end the poll now. Okay. So the first question was, in the first part, we had a look at a golden torque. Can you tell me how that was actually worn, please?
Yes, golden torques, if they're of that size, we say they are neck torques, and they would have been worn quite simply around the neck. And the 2 terminals at the front, that is where the torque would have been eased open, gold being a very soft material. The torque would then have been placed on the neck and eased back into place. The 2 terminals were not fastened together in any point. It's not like a modern necklace where you have a hook or a clasp. It would simply have sat around the neck. Terminals would have rested on the top of your collarbone. Not particularly comfortable, and we think they're probably most likely to have been worn over fabric. So they would have been an external necklace, not worn directly against the skin.
Right. The next question is, are these early, I think this is right back to the beginning of the talk, are these early British gift givers, are they nomadic, or are they settled in one location?
Oh, that's a very good question. In terms of British prehistory, if we're looking back at the Paleolithic, which is the earliest period of what people call the Stone Age, we're looking at a nomadic population in Britain. At this point, Britain was joined to mainland Europe by a land bridge, and human groups, we can't really talk about societies at this point, we're talking about small groups of humans, would have moved around mainland Europe and onto what is now the British Isles, probably on a seasonal basis, following food sources and following animals and the harvest, the ripening of natural fruits. So in addition, we have a period where right at the beginning of the Paleolithic was still in the Ice Age. So as ice extended down over Britain, we know that we have humans leaving the British Isles area of land on a regular basis. And they come and they go and they come and they go as the ice retreats and the ice moves down. And it's not really until about 11,000 BC that you have permanent occupation of Britain. And then you have the rising of the water as the last ice age ends. That then creates the channel, so Britain becomes an island. People can still move at that point because you can use the water as a transport network, a transport route for moving across to mainland Europe. But that is when, as we move into the Mesolithic, we start to see not only seasonal movement, but also some sort of longer term settlement. And if people look at the information on Star Carr, which is a Mesolithic site in Yorkshire, recent excavations have suggested that previously it was thought of as a seasonal site where people went there in the autumn to hunt deer and to harvest local vegetation. But actually there is now more evidence that it may also have been a semi-permanent place of residence. But it's not until you get to the Neolithic and the introduction of farming that people, instead of moving after the food, have to live near the food because they're actually creating it. They're actually harvesting the crops that they have planted. They are domesticating the animals. So in the Neolithic, that's when we have permanent settlement across Britain. Interesting in terms of gifts, because the implication in that question is that nomadic gift givers would probably have gifted gifts that were able to transport, that you could transport, that were portable, that were handheld or were worn on the body. Whereas when you get to the Neolithic and then into the Bronze Age, where you have larger settled communities, that's when you start to get larger examples of gift giving, such as the social feasting, because not only do you have a larger community of people, but they are settled. Very good question. So yes, were nomadic back at the beginning of the Paleolithic, settlement then really roughly from the Neolithic period.
Thank you. The next question. The mirror found in Devon, could it have been buried to avoid a Viking raid?
Oh, now that's a very good question. We know that the Vikings settled in Scandinavia were looking to the east coast of England initially as a place to raid, and one of the first Viking raids was on Lindisfarne, because monasteries were seen as very easy targets, not just because the monks were not warrior-like, but because monasteries and churches often had precious collections. So they had objects made from gold and silver, which the Vikings could raid. Later on, the Vikings then start to settle in Britain because what they want is farmland. And Britain at this point, we got into the Anglo-Saxon period, is a very fertile, very rich agricultural land, and the Vikings come to settle. Being in Devon, there is unlikely to have been direct Viking raids on Devon. Devon is part of the country which later became Wessex, and we then think about Alfred the Great. The Viking settlement and the Viking raids were on the north and the east coast. And in fact, under Alfred the Great, the Viking incursion had become so troublesome that they actually agreed to split the country in half. And in Anglo-Saxon times, you have an area of Britain to the north and the east known as Danelaw, where the Vikings lived with their capital at York. And then the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom under Alfred the Great and his successors was then the part which is now southern and western England. So Devon was unlikely to have been raided by the Vikings. There probably was trading, but that far away from initial points of Viking landing, that item is more likely to have been buried, possibly not as a votive offering because it was a singular find, it was by itself, and votive offerings tend to be in groups. Probably buried as part of a funeral. So a way of taking it out of human circulation when someone dies and burying it with them. Good question.
Thank you. And the final question for today, what's your favourite object from today's talk?
Oh, that's a good question. I think my favourite object is probably an object which isn't particularly interesting to look at. It's the Vindalanda Tablet. The reason that I like it is it's because it's a bit of a gift to archaeologists, because that little bit of writing at the end of the Vindalanda Tablet, the bit where it says, "Farewell, sister, I hope to see you soon, may you prosper," was actually written by the person sending the invitation. So it's actually written in Claudia's handwriting. and it is the first example that we currently know of a woman writing in Latin. So the top of the text was written by a scribe at the fort, and then she added her own personal postscript at the bottom. And that's just a wonderful gift. First example of a woman writing in an informal context in Roman Britain.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Catherine. And can I say thank you? And I'm sure I'm saying thank you on behalf of everybody who's listened to these talks over the last 3 weeks. They've been fascinating. I can't wait for the new year. And that concludes our talk for today. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much for joining me, everyone. Have a good festive break.